All right. Well, Rob Rui here with LTAM. And as you know, I'm always talking about Jordan B. Peterson. And this is an awesome talk about men and the crisis of masculinity. So, what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into it. I hope you get some value out of this. If you do, follow us and all that great stuff. So, here we go.
This series is focused in on how men can be men. Why do you think there is such a crisis of masculinity in the first place, and why are there so many people out there who are angry at you for even talking to men?
Well, I think you could think about it as a consequence, in some sense, of the lack of a concept of original sin, oddly enough. I mean, people bear an existential burden, you know. It's an intrinsic part of life to, I suppose, to feel guilty in relationship to nature and to feel guilty in relationship to culture. You know, it's difficult for us to live in harmony with the natural world, and for the natural world to live in harmony with us, by the way. And none of us are all we could be on the social front. And one of the consequences, and so we have that sense intrinsically, you know, that there's a lack in us that needs to be redressed. And unfortunately, that can be weaponized, and has been. And what I see happening to young men in particular, boys as well, not just young men, and maybe even, you know, maybe starting at the age of toddlers, is that we have this sense in the world that human beings live in antagonism to nature and that we're actually a malevolent force. And that our social structures, which are clearly capable of the commission of atrocity, are fundamentally oppressive, patriarchal in their nature. And so then if you're a male in a society with that ethos, the motive force that drives you into the world to live is associated with rapaciousness and despoilation on the natural front, and then oppression and atrocity on the social front. It's like, well then, if you're the least bit conscientious, because this sort of accusation hurts conscientious young men the most, then the best you can do is, well, let's say castrate yourself. How would that be? And that would be real comical, except that it's also happening. So I guess that's why I think there's a crisis. And there's something serious at the root of it, right? Because we do have to take the fact of the potential damage we can do to the natural world and the social world. We have to take that seriously, but the proper consequence of taking that seriously is not to commit hara-kiri, let's say, in a fit of moral anxiety and take yourself completely out of the game. But that's the insistence now, and it's really, and I see that psychoanalytically, you know, I see that as a manifestation at a symbolic level of something like, well, symbolically, that's associated with the devouring mother, right? It's an overweening and destructive false compassion that has this devouring quality. And yeah, and that's basically where we're at. So
you know, it's one of the things that's striking about the sort of hatred that you've gotten from so many is that you've literally been asked why you're even bothering to speak to men. I mean, there is this crisis of masculinity, right? There is this idea that every form of masculinity is toxic, and you've spent your life trying to talk to men and say, no, you can channel that masculinity in not only a good way, but a necessary and productive and useful way. And people gotten angry at you for this. Where do you think that's coming from? Why? That's obviously a good thing that you're doing. Why are so many people upset with you for that?
Well, the thing is, I never really set out to talk to men specifically, but I did set out, at least in part, to make a case for the utility of both the feminine and the masculine spirit. And it turned out that making the case for the masculine spirit was something that was more demanded by the culture, let's say. The anger, that's a complicated issue. We touched on some of it in relationship to the despoiling of nature and the idea of the oppressive and atrocity committing patriarchy. But then there's another issue too, which I think is germane. Because of family fragmentation, there's a very large number of women who have just like there's a very large number of men who have never had a real word of encouragement in their whole life. It's a really sad thing to see. It's a really, really sad thing to see that deeply and to have seen that reflected in so many thousands of people. But there are many women who've never had a positive relationship with anyone male in their life. And so one of the consequences of that, we know, for example, that younger women are more likely to be attracted to men who show dark triad traits, narcissistic, Machiavellian, and psychopathic. And people who have those traits are characterized by the mimicry of competence. And so what women want in men more than anything else is competent generosity, and the data on that are very clear. But you can mimic that if you're narcissistic, and if you're a young woman, you can be deluded by that. It's partly because it points to the problem of dissociating competent confidence from the expression of power per se. So we could call power, I'll define that as the willingness and ability to use compulsion to attain your aims. Now, if you are someone who has a proclivity to manifest power, then that looks like the manifestation of both ambition and will. And if you haven't had a positive relationship with anyone masculine in your life, and maybe with not even with your own internal masculinity, say, you can't discriminate between power and the ambition that serves competence. And so because that's terrifying, because the power, if you have had only negative relationships with men, their capability to use power becomes such a threat that it has to be opposed at all costs, even if it manifests itself within the developmental pathway of your own son. And so some of that's familial breakdown, and then you have a multi-generational pattern of that makes it even worse. And so that's definitely part of it. You know, there's an ideological drum that's being beaten constantly, both on the sociological constructivist front, right? That's the oppressive patriarchy, and then on the environmental front. And then you add to that the fact that, well, on the leftists, especially the radical types, their whole damn doctrine, it's the most pathological doctrine you could invent if you set out to invent a pathological doctrine. And I mean that. I'm not making a joke. I really mean that in the deepest possible sense. The notion that the fundamental human motivation is the willingness and ability to use compulsion, power. It's all about power. And every time I hear that now from someone, I think, that is not a sociological observation. That is a confession on your part. And it's also just complete bloody nonsense. I mean,
So if you hear what he says, by calling it a confession, through not educating yourself and oppressing people at all costs and weaponizing masculinity against men, you are confessing that your true pursuit is power. In addition to that, you heard that he said it is so insidious that a mother that sees her son portraying masculine traits will go so far as to oppress her son as well. I believe that's also a confession of power as well too. Wow, such powerful information. Like I said, if you haven't heard Jordan B. Peterson, I would totally recommend listening to a lot of his speeches. He does a phenomenal job of delivering a powerful message through facts, data, statistics. This is an extremely educated man here. And even a man like himself is under fire from places like education, government, and media to shut him up just because he is trying to educate people on how things are based off facts. I always talk about people coming and speaking from their feelings And fear is a feeling, right? And he just very well and very eloquently and detailed showed us how if we come from a place of feeling 100% of the time, you can end up being an oppressive tyrant that will sacrifice their own children for power. Wow, that is so powerful. So let's get back to it.
You all know this. You have friends because they're compelled to be your friends? Like, that's definitely not how you have friends. You might have bully henchmen that way, but you don't have friends. Power is an extraordinarily unstable basis to establish a marriage on. Plus, it just doesn't work because it turns out that women who are so annoying are very difficult to oppress, you know? So you can try, but it's not that easy. And I don't think that we've been all that historically successful in doing so. But it's also a preposterous proposition because the expression of power within an intimate relationship does not produce intimacy or a relationship. The best it can produce is like a combination of tyranny and slavery, and that does not characterize the institution of marriage per se. So there is this insistence among the radicals that power is the fundamental motivation, and then you think too, okay, you're only motivated by power. That means that we can only get along if our interests align, because if you're motivated by power and I'm motivated by power and our interests don't align, and there's nothing else but power, then the only option I have is to turn you into an enemy and try to destroy you, because we can't engage in dialogue. That's dialogos. And the reason we can't engage in dialogue is because there's no logos. There's just power. So there's no such, this is why it's a good thing for conservatives to understand. You have to understand that the debate about free speech on campus, in the deepest sense, is not a debate about who should be allowed to speak freely. That's nothing. That's a trivial debate. You can even understand it in some sense. If I don't agree with you, maybe I don't want you to talk. But the debate is about something much deeper, which is whether or not the idea of free speech itself is just a mask developed essentially by Europeans to justify the oppressive patriarchy in the most devious possible way. And the answer the radicals have to that question is yes, that's exactly what it is. And so there's no free speech whatsoever. That's an illusion that's promulgated by people who are only trying to justify their claim to power. That's what the bloody argument is about. And I just think all of that's, it's wrong in every way. It's wrong theologically, it's wrong psychologically, it's wrong scientifically. Even chimpanzees who have a patriarchal social structure, their social structures, if they are based on power, on compulsion, they're unstable, and the alpha chimps who use power are very likely to meet an extraordinarily brutal and premature end. So Frans de Waal, the Dutch primatologist, has detailed out this wonderfully. He's shown that even among our closest biological relatives, it's the ability to make peace and to engage in reciprocal interactions that constitutes the basis for a stable polity, even among chimps.
Wow. So if you listen closely to what he just laid out and said, the pursuit of power eventually ends up in a brutal death to all involved. But the pursuit of peace and cooperation is what creates a stable society. Would you say that we are pursuing peace and cooperation, or are we pursuing power at all costs? Wow, Jordan Peterson, you are the GOAT. You are seriously the GOAT. Let's keep going.
And it's obviously the case that that's the proper basis for social relations, especially among free people. And I've been trying to puzzle out, especially in my lecture tour recently, what the antithesis to power is, or to the will to power, let's say, in terms of arbitrary compulsion. And it's something like the spirit of free and voluntary play. And that's a wonderful thing to know. It's so optimistic. You guys were talking about optimism earlier, you know. So imagine this, is that if you structure your relations optimally, and I mean optimally, with yourself, with your intimate partner, with your family, with your community, the highest level of attainment of that structuring is the manifestation of the spirit of voluntary play. And that's so lovely because there's nothing better than playing fundamentally. And you know, human beings and other mammals as well also have a biological circuit that mediates play. That was discovered by a man named Jaak Panksepp, and he showed that play is unbelievably important to the development of children for a variety of complicated reasons, partly because they're practicing to be competent adults, but also that it can be suppressed by almost any other emotion or motivation. So your kids can't really play if they're hungry or tired or wet or upset. The same would apply within your relationship. If there's stresses and tensions, the play disappears. But if you optimize the relationship and the circumstance, then the spirit of play can manifest itself. And I would also say that's also the fundamental purpose of fathers in some sense, is to imagine that paradise, that's a walled garden. That's what paradise means. So it's walls, structure, and then the garden inside is nature, and a nature that's tended. The masculine role in child rearing is something like the erection of the walls so that play can manifest itself within the walls. And that's a real good combination of security, because that's what the walls are for, but then the kind of freedom that allows for untrammeled development to occur in the most positive possible sense. And so I would say that those of us who are standing against the radicals who insist that the only human motivation is power can oppose that in part by putting forward the observation that the proper antithesis to that is the spirit of voluntary play. And that's what I hope we're going to do with the Daily Wire.
Wow. The spirit of voluntary play. That means that if you're playing a game of soccer or football or basketball, that means there's rules within the game. And everybody knows their place. Everybody knows their role. Everybody plays their role well to the best of their ability. And you can't play the game without the necessary players. You can't play a game of football without a quarterback. It's just impossible. It's never going to happen. You can't play soccer without your goalie. So every role in a relationship and building an environment for your children is necessary to play the game and to have a potential successful outcome, because we know life's crazy. Things happen. Even under the best conditions, things can go sideways. And having the necessary players involved in raising a child is critical to the outcome of the game. So if you're trying to attain power over one or the other, whether it be the husband or the wife, or take them out of the game like completely, such as divorce, and God forbid you are divorced and you're attaining power over the other person by speaking ill of them and desecrating their role and not giving it the proper respect, you essentially, if you are the one doing such things, you're essentially becoming a tyrant and oppressing the entire situation, thus losing the game. And not only do you, as the power-seeking tyrant, lose under the false, veil of short-term success in other places in your life, your children, yourself, and everybody involved ultimately loses in the end. These are great words to think about. These are great thoughts to think about. So if you like this kind of education, if you're interested in growing and learning more about how we can raise a good society, if you love your children, you may want to think about checking out some more Jordan B. Peterson content and think about the concept of, let's play a fair game together with all the right pieces and respect the roles of each player in the game. Let them play their position well and understand that each player in this game is necessary. And if you're seeking power over your duty to play your position well and you're focused on the power, you are the one creating the issues. No matter what you think, no matter what you believe the other person has done wrong, you are not making the right move. It's probably a better option if maybe you're in some type of issue with your husband and wife, just like a football or soccer or basketball team would do. They would practice. They would find out what they're doing wrong and try and improve on these things over time. And as you grow up in the game, you'll develop a sense of maturity. We all do that. And you will grow and you have the best, the optimal situation for your children. Powerful stuff. So yeah, my name's Rob Rui, LTAM. And we'll see you here on another reaction time. Make sure you follow, subscribe, like, all that great stuff. And go to LTAM and make a donation today. We could use your help in continuing our efforts here. So see you real soon. LTAM, Rob Rui, and we are out.